Halfway there, more or less, almost. Day 44 today, officially halfway tomorrow, which is kind of hard to believe. Things have moved. It's been busy, but there's still kind of a lot out there. So we have sine die in 46 days, which is going to be, again, a time to celebrate. But this is also a realization that we have a lot more left to do over these next 45 days. My goal here, sort of generally this morning, is to kind of reset and realign expectations for what we should see over these next 45 days. And here's where we are. No piece of legislation has made it through both chambers yet. And we have hundreds of bills that still must be heard in committee. Given that volume, now is the time to start narrowing in on priorities within each committee so that we can move legislation onto the floor. It's getting tighter and tighter as time goes by. So what we know is going to be true is that it is incredibly busy and the work of the Senate is going to be intense. As far as how many bills or which bills will move, let me start going forward that there is going to be what is the equivalent of a shark-infested moat around the Rules Committee. If a bill was not put in on time, it is extremely, extremely unlikely to be moving this session except and unless there is a very specific reason. We just have too many bills this year. And so we have too many bills that still need a lot of work, that need a lot of amendments. And so that's going to take time. And the more bills that have original hearing, the harder it is to get to the bills that have already been heard and work through to make sure that they are appropriately ready for passage. The big note is that a number of committees are still hearing bills for the very first time and working through the most complicated issues. And so as we think about Fridays and Mondays moving forward, normally they have been a little bit slower. We can anticipate those being quite full over these next 45 days. What we do know is that we have one constitutional duty, and that's to pass a balanced budget. We will. I have no doubts about that. We're looking forward to seeing the revenue estimates coming early in March 7th, to be able to have a better idea. Things are tight, but they are not, it is not a crisis. It is not an austerity budget. This is a very normalized budget with normalized revenues. We are going to get through this well, and I feel very confident that we're in a very good place. I do believe that we will see the passage of our juvenile justice bill as part of the accountability, rehabilitation, and collaboration of our juvenile justice system overall package. We know that there was some movement on that bill in the House last night. That bill will be taken up with amendments on Tuesday in judicial proceedings. They've been working very, very closely together between the chambers, and I think we are in a very close place to get to near passage by the end of session. Or get to passage by the end of session. What we do know is that the specific areas of juvenile justice that we wanted to impact were not working as optimally as hoped for. And so when we are focusing in on young people using firearms or being involved in carjackings or auto thefts, we have to do more. That will continue to be the focus of the bill that ultimately passes. Third, we are addressing the housing shortage and housing affordability crisis through legislation that allows more Marylanders to get into long-term housing. What we've said from the beginning is this isn't rocket science. It is a matter of supply and cost. And so the issues that we have to pass this year increase the supply of affordable housing and housing overall, and policies reduce the cost of building new housing in the state of Maryland moving forward. The rest of the issues out there are ones that we will see how the committees do, but in terms of prioritization, those are the priorities. Those are the things that must pass. A couple things, sort of general themes remain 45 days in. The Senate is still in the place that we do not need to raise general funds this year. We believe that we are in a budget cycle that is normal and that we can fulfill all of our obligations and invest strategically and importantly into the state's priorities without the need to raise general fund taxes. The end-of-life issue remains deeply, deeply personal for each member of the Senate. There's been lots of conversation on this, and I think the votes are very tight because as it's become more real as a policy issue, it has begun, I think senators have taken a much closer look, and so we'll see where it lands this year. This is not a bill that we're going to be twisting arms on. This is one where it's deeply personal and people are taking a very personal look, and so we'll want to know where the votes are before things move forward, but it's going to be very tight. Should it move forward. In terms of new business, just want to touch on a couple issues. First is SSTAT. This has been an issue that's gotten a lot of attention over the last week. There's no question that assessments need to be accurate, and people should be paying their fair share based on the accurate reflection of the value of the property that they own. I'm extremely disappointed that these notices were not delivered on time. But that doesn't mean that we should not have a system that relies on accurate assessments. And so we're working to consider different options. I don't believe this is about foregoing revenue. I think this is about making sure that our tax system is equitable, efficient, and fair. We've also heard a fair amount about GPS monitoring, ankle bracelet monitoring. Just yesterday in the Budget and Taxation Subcommittee, we heard from the Judiciary Branch on this issue. I will say I was rather disappointed in the approach that the Judiciary took with the subcommittee, trying to what I perceived as relieve itself of any responsibility here. I think that was an unfortunate approach, and this is a problem that we have to take a short-term solution, or we have to find a short-term solution for those who are currently on monitoring, and then we have to have a broader conversation about where this should land. Ankle monitoring oversight and administration in the long term, but right now we have to solve a problem that we shouldn't be learning about in this moment, in this week. This is something that the judiciary had knowledge of, should have given us insight into ahead of session, and yet again it feels like we have been stuck to solve a situation that could have been solved with thoughtful conversation, and instead we're trying to do a short-term fix. So I'm very thankful to Senator Elfreth, who addressed this issue in the hearing in her subcommittee. We want to remind everyone that there's nothing that the legislature can't immediately write a check to something. The budget is the way that we operate. And so the idea that a program would be shut down because the legislature can't, or the state government can't write an immediate check that would be available once the budget passes in May or is signed into law and enacted in May with a deficiency appropriation it simply doesn't make any sense to me. And so, I imagine we will have to have ongoing conversations with the judiciary, but I certainly will be taking a much, much closer look in the judiciary's budget to understand exactly how they are spending their funds as well. With that, let me pause and open it up for questions.
Mr. President, regarding SSTAT, is it time for new leadership at the agency, and is it would this agency be better managed if it were perhaps moved into under the auspices of the comptroller?
Taking the second question first, unclear, maybe, but I don't think that it's obvious to me that a shift in the agency automatically makes it one way better or worse. And so I think we have to be really thoughtful about that. I'm open to studying it and trying to determine whether or not that is the appropriate place for the assessment process to exist. There is this odd interaction between the state SSTAT, which is doing the assessments, and then the local administration of the property tax collection and revenue process. And so I think that has been an ongoing thorn that has been discussed in the budget every year for many years. In terms of the individual leadership, look, this is a really disappointing situation. There are kind of basic functions of government. This seems to be a basic function of government. I understand that it's easy to blame a contractor. That's something that I think a lot of times when somebody makes a mistake, they want to find the person to blame. That looks like what's happening here to me. If you're the head of an agency, it's your responsibility to make sure that the responsibilities of that agency are executed effectively. And so, I don't want to prejudge the situation. From what I know, it's pretty disappointing. And as I learn more, I think there would have to be accountability if it continues to be, it's clear that there was negligence.
A follow-up then. Michael Higgs was initially appointed by Governor Larry Hogan to be on the PSC because of his activities on social media as head of the Montgomery Republican Central Committee. The committee ultimately held him, so he was moved into a position that is not does not require confirmation by the Senate. If SSTAT remains an independent agency, is that a leadership position that the Senate believes should be under confirmation scrutiny?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be against it either. I don't think that it's absolutely necessary that it be Senate confirmed. It's an administrative position. It's an executive level position in the executive branch. I don't know. I mean, it's really much more about administering. It's less about policy calls and policy judgment. And so I think that's generally where we see the Senate confirmation process coming in, is when there's clear policy judgments at stake and individuals charged with leading the agency have a policy role. In terms of SDAT, it's much more of an administering of existing laws that are kind of a process-based entity. So whether or not it's Senate confirmed, I don't think would be a distinguishing factor for me. Whether or not the PSC situation impacted, I don't care who it is. They've got to be effective and they got to follow the law. In this case, it appears that outsourcing to a contractor is just not a sufficient excuse to me. I don't know the degree of oversight that existed. As I learn more, and I assume as the administration learns more, there's got to be some accountability for these types of mistakes.
Mr. President, going back to home detention, can you give us some ideas that are being kicked around for a short-term solution? Should the program go forward, and if so, how?
Sure. Well, look, I think my understanding from the hearing is that the program was being shut down. The repayment process was being shut down, or was shut down by the judiciary last Friday because of unavailable funds. It's my understanding that the judiciary has rolled over roughly $5 million a year of unused dollars for multiple years in a row. That seems to me like they certainly have some unnecessary fluff in their budget. And so, certainly it would have been helpful if they had come to the table to say that some of the money that they consistently roll over, that they would be able to float for a certain period of time until a deficiency appropriation could be made with the passage of the FY25 budget. That's a very standard thing that we do. That's why the deficiency appropriation process exists. An agency will have an overrun in one area, will use cash available from a different area that is under budget and float it until a deficiency appropriation reconciles the two. That wasn't the judiciary's approach, and I think that's because they don't want to be monitoring, they don't want to have a part of the GPS monitoring system. Whether or not they're the right entity to, in the long term, oversee GPS monitoring is a valid conversation. And maybe it should be something that the Department of Corrections and Parole and Probation should be overseeing, or maybe it should be local sheriff's agencies in each county has a specific role. I do believe it would be better to have a statewide approach on this GPS monitoring. I don't think 24 different versions of GPS monitors makes a lot of sense. It seems like quite an inefficient system. I mean, you look at the system as it is right now, $450 a month for GPS monitoring seems pretty ludicrous in my mind. You could go out and buy a bunch of AirTags to some degree and build out a system. It seems like it can't nearly be as complicated as what we're being charged. But admittedly, I'm not in the business or know much about GPS monitoring on the day-to-day. But either way, this is a serious program that has been in operation, and to just shut it down without any warning, especially when it appears to me the judiciary was well aware that this problem likely could have existed as long as 6 months ago. We should have been having conversations about this not in February of 2024. We should have been doing this last fall or winter to figure out what the longer-term plan would be. So instead of shutting it down, I wish they had floated the program and kept it going until this deficiency appropriation could be put forward. It makes it much more difficult to see them as partners in the work of figuring out the long-term solution, but we'll do what's best for the state of Maryland and the people of Maryland.
So do they have the money? It's just that they don't?
Well, it's pretty clear to me the judiciary has plenty of money. When they're rolling over $5 million a year, that's why I say I really, personally look forward to taking a much closer look at the judiciary's budget. It appears that, they certainly have cash reserves that they are unwilling or have been unwilling to allocate to make sure that we can keep this program running. And so, we just want to make sure that they're using their money as efficiently as possible. That's right.
On the same topic, you talked about a larger conversation needs to be had about this. Should, the government be subsidizing the cost of home detention? This program was set to expire potentially at the end of this year. It's always going to end at some point. It's earlier. What is your position on whether it should go forward beyond that? Should the state be investing money in it?
Look, yes. I mean, when we think about the process of administering criminal justice, that is an inherently public function. And when we operate jails and prisons, or we operate probation and parole department, part of the criminal justice system is ensuring that the tools and instruments and instrumentalities exist to administer a fair and equitable justice system overall. And so, the idea that somebody's freedom prior to a conviction is determined on whether or not they have $450 a month to pay for a GPS monitor, that to me is just simply the wrong calculus. It should be the calculus of, is this person a threat to themselves or society? If not, then we should accommodate a system that fairly and appropriately monitors them ahead of trial. That seems to me a public role and a public function. The system as it exists today, we were using federal funds. The availability of federal funds were really what was bolstering the program as is, and I think we were hoping to see how it would play out. I think there are two big questions. Where is the long-term place that it should reside overall and be administered? Who should be issuing the contracts? What should be in those contracts? How can we make sure we're getting the best deal for the taxpayers of Maryland? And then secondly, is really this kind of broader question about why it was here in the first place, why we were forcing people to pay for it in the first place. I think that we've been doing a number of things to try and shift pre-detention or pre-trial detention so that we've eliminated or limited cash bail. We don't want to have debtor prisons. Just because you can't pay doesn't mean you should lose your freedom. And so having a home monitoring system that is functional, monitored, it's good for public safety, it's good for individuals who are accused of crimes that otherwise have not been convicted. I mean, it's a fundamental cornerstone bedrock of democracy that you are innocent until proven guilty. And so we should be facilitating that in all the systems that we have.
Mr. President, you noted a minute ago that the judiciary didn't seem particularly interested in doing this. Is that an excuse or justification for poorly managing a program that they're required to do?
That's a great question. No, I'm just is it a justification? No, it is not a justification. There is a fair justification from the judiciary that the role of monitoring individuals on home detention is an executive function and not a judicial branch function. That is a very reasonable debate and conversation, policy discussion to have, and that there is a separation of powers issue, and we should engage in that discussion. That should be a very robust conversation to figure out, should we move home monitoring from the judicial branch into the executive branch in one of the agencies within the agency. And I think that's the right conversation to have. I wish we were having it back in the fall or winter before we came into session so that we would have a plan right now. In the meantime, the program exists in the judiciary. And so to just kind of throw one's hands up or an entity's hands up because they're uncomfortable with having the program in the first place is just the wrong answer, in my opinion. Wrong approach. Yep. Please.
Ferguson, the Judiciary Committee voted the juvenile justice bill out of committee yesterday. I know JPR is planning to do some amending of the bill to vote into, of course, soon. To your understanding, will the Senate try to match the House amendments? Is there anything that you're foreseeing being stripped from the bill or added?
Yeah, well, I would say I wouldn't be matching. They've been working very closely together, but there's lots of conversation jointly being had about different issues and where the tension points are, particularly around the right jurisdiction for 10 to 12-year-olds, issues around the probation extension length and technical violations versus postponing of probation. I'm forgetting another big one. But overall, the amendments that moved through or were adopted in judiciary yesterday are largely things that have been considered by members or have gone back and forth. So there were ideas that had come out of kind of conversations in the Senate that I think were incorporated in parts of the Judiciary Committee. I don't know if they'll be the exact same for each chamber, but that's natural, and I think they'll be very, very, very similar if they're not almost the exact same, because there has been such kind of discussion and coordination happening so far. But I think we'll see by Tuesday, and every member, there could be an amendment out there that nobody has heard of yet, and so that's the nature of legislating, and so that could come up, open for discussion, and people could vote for it. I don't foresee that happening necessarily, but it could. So I don't want to prejudge how the legislation will move to the floor yet until it's actually there, but I suspect they will be very similar.
To pivot to a different bill, I know you said that the votes are
I mean, look, if I don't think that there are enough votes on the floor to pass the bill, I don't think we will have JPR vote the bill. And so I think that's that's an important point. And, as we've had conversations, this has been an issue we haven't taken to the floor since 2019. I think it's one of those issues that if people don't have to really think about it, they don't think about it because it's a hard concept and it's an upsetting concept for a lot of people. But as we've been, really noting that this is a year where we want to see robust and real conversation and the potential of moving it to the floor, I think it's forced a number of members to really evaluate for themselves where do they land on this issue. And so it's tight, it's close. And I think there are some people that are kind of trying to see with the right protections, could they get there? They're uncomfortable with it, but might be able to find a way. And so, this is not one where we're interested in sort of negotiating a compromise to square a vote. I think it's just such a deeply personal issue that, I want each member to feel confident in where they are. And once we get a sense, if you don't see it coming to the floor, it's because we don't think that we have the votes in the committee or the floor to get there.
The House is entertaining a bill to remove CARE from the Hague Commission. I haven't seen a crossfire, pardon me, with the Senate. Does the Senate have any thoughts on that?
Look, on this one in particular, we don't have a Senate crossfile. Look, I think what happened, I just think there were some comments as well that were really unnecessary and detracted from the work of the commission. That said, I do think that we've gotten into a habit of maybe overly relying on organizations for appointment. Part of the challenge here is that we have, as a legislature, been very quick to defer the appointment power away from the governor or from the legislature and to specific organizations. And as I have reviewed this further and sort of considered it more, I think that's a mistake. I think, we certainly absolutely should be getting input and feedback from organizations, but to give the appointing authority away to an organization, it creates a lot of risk in a system writ large on any issue. There's lots of times where an organization that one year is upstanding, great organization, and another year new leadership changes and everything kind of goes off the cliff. And so if we're putting these things into law, that we should have the appropriate mechanisms to ensure that the appointments are flexible and not restrained based on specific organizational. And so this is something we've been talking to committee leadership about, that as task force and boards come forward, we should have provisions included that talk about kind of codes of conducts of these boards and how the appointing authority would actually function. There's a broader conversation. I don't know that we'll solve the bigger issue. I was very surprised to learn that the removal wasn't possible. I just assumed there was a process in law of if something happens on any issue in any area, that there was a process for removal, but it appears that's not the case. The challenge is if you do it, it has a huge impact everywhere, and so we've got to make sure that we do it the right way. I don't know if we'll get there this year, but we are being more mindful for appointment moving forward, that maybe there are less appointments deferred to outside organizations that are not duly elected by the people of Maryland.
Going back to medical aid and dying, you said you're not twisting arms, but is leadership polling membership, doing a vote count to see where they are, and how often are you doing that?
Certainly, I mean regularly. In every in regular conversations on a daily basis, there's probably at least one member I'm having a conversation to see where they are on this particular issue and several others. But some are more about trying to move people a certain way. I would say, I am very supportive of this option. I think it is the right way to go for Maryland with the right protections in place. I voted for it previously, but I do reasonably and rationally understand why somebody would be on the other side of it. And so I want to know where people are and why they are there, but not necessarily, I'm not pressuring them to move on something that is so personal.
One last quick question then. You talked about the glut of bills. How much of this bill choke is the result of just a larger number of legislation, and how much of it is related to lawmakers who are bringing bills that are either performative or frankly just not worked on enough in the interim and not ready for prime time, and there's the expectation that the committee is going to make these bills ready for them?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think I don't want to question anybody's motives in any way. And so for whatever reason somebody brings a bill, that is their choice. They're duly elected by their district to bring a bill. I do think that it's important, we've done some big things with the blueprint, with Climate Solutions Now, we're doing lots of things on police reform and criminal justice. So a lot of the big issues have been tackled, and so what we're seeing are a lot of new ideas come to the fore, and they need a lot of work. We need to get more perspectives. And so, I think a lot of people have learned this year with the huge number of bills that timing matters. And if something's gonna need a lot of work or has lots of different things that have to be adjusted, that's what the interim's for. And so it may not get a vote. And I think that's an important point too that we will reiterate over and over again. Not every bill gets a vote. Every bill must be considered, but not every bill gets a vote. And there's good reason for that. There's times where it might be a great idea, but it might not be ready. And so instead of getting people on record voting no, to then have to change their vote in the future if it's in a better position or a different time, it's rather we hold on to it and bring it back next year. And so I think we'll see a number of bills in that condition this year. Excellent. All right. Oh, yes, I got to do it. I have a bill hearing. So thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe and healthy. All right. See you all.